Halo, apakah sudah bisa mendengar? Maaf, saya belum dengar.
Mas Budy, we can
Ya.
hear you.
Assalamualaikum
warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh. The
Waalaikumsalam.
Honorable Dean of Faculty of Economics and Business, University of Jember, Prof. Dr. Isti Fadah, M.Sc. We respect our speakers at today's event, Prof. Budy Prasetyo, Resosudarmo Ph.D. and Dr. Salut Muhidin, M.Sc. Dear Moderator of today's webinar, Mr. Muhammad Zeqi Yasin, S.A. M.Sc. We respect the lecturer and invited guests and all the participants of international virtual course today that I am proud of. Peace be upon you, and Allah mercy and blessings. Salam, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. Best wishes and peace to all of us. Good morning to all the happy attendees of this wonderful international virtual course event. Praise and gratitude for the presence of God Almighty for having given us the gift of health in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic situations, so that we can gather virtually at the event, International Virtual Course by Development Economics Program, University of Jember, with the theme Sustainable Natural Resource. Please allow me, Aulia Pamasa Setiyantono, as the Master of Ceremony in today's International Virtual Course, to read out the schedule of event first. Number 1, opening. Number 2, singing the song of Indonesia Raya, hymn of the University of Jember, and March of the Faculty of Economic and Business, University of Jember. Number 3, welcome greetings. Number 4, main event. Number 5, documentation and closing. Entering the first event, namely the opening, let's open the webinar together by reading Basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Entering the second event, namely singing the anthem of Indonesia Raya, followed by the hymn of the University of Jember and the March of Faculty of Economics and Business, University of Jember.
Langkah seirama ke depan menuju masa depan yang cerah, menjadi garda terdepan pendidikan, mengubah cara memimpin bangsa. Tanpa sivitas akademika, fakultas ekonomi dan bisnis, bersatu tekad sukseskan pembangunan bangsa, menjadi ekonom terlatih terdidik di bawah panji alma mater tercinta, Universitas Tunggal. Siap tunaikan tridharma perguruan tinggi, kuatkan semangat jiwa Pancasila. Hidup fakultas ekonomi dan bisnis, kita jaya selamanya.
Next is the speech that will be delivered by the Dean of Faculty of Economics and Business, University of Jember, to Prof. Dr. Isti Fadah, M.Sc. We invite you.
Thank you very much, Aulia. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Salam Budaya, Salam Kebajikan. My peace be upon you, Excellencies, distinguished guests, and all the participants. Please allow me to welcome you to the opening ceremony of the International Virtual Course Series 1 with the theme Sustainable Natural Resource. Let me first thank Honorable all of Vice Dean, Honorable Bapak Herman Cahyodiarto as the Head of Economic Development Study Program for his excellent leadership and the staff members to their hard work to make this event possible. Also, I would like to thank our speakers today, Professor Budy Prasetyo, Resosudarmo Ph.D. as lecturer and researcher from Australia National University, and Dr. Salut Muhidin, M.Sc. as lecturer and researcher from Macquarie University. Thank you for allocating your time to join and share the knowledge with us today. Excellencies, distinguished guests, and all the participants. This international virtual course is intended to address the issue about the sustainable natural resource. The concept of natural resource refers to naturally occurring living and non-living elements of the earth system, including plants, animals, but also water, soil, and minerals. A prominent way to think about natural resources is to look at them in terms of depletion rates, do they regenerate, and if so, at what pace? Some resources, such as trees and plants, are renewable because they regenerate relatively quickly. Others, such as copper and oil, takes much longer to form and are considered non-renewable. Natural resources are often viewed as key assets driving development and wealth creation. Over time, and with progressive industrialization, resource use increased. In some cases, exploitation level came to exceed resources, natural regeneration rates. They said human action threatened most species with global extinction more than ever before. So, how can we sustainably manage the natural resources in order to build resilient economies, while at the same time protecting biodiversity. Excellencies, a strengthened multilateral cooperation provides opportunities to build more inclusive societies and ensure our path to sustainable development. This event will provide an opportunity to build and strengthen our awareness to the sustainable natural resource. Dialogue on introduction to empirical methods in environmental economics, and also the three dimensions of sustainable development. To all students who participating in this international course, I wish you very fruitful discussions and many insights from our speakers today. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you for the welcome. Entering the next event, namely the main event, namely the presentation of material from a very extraordinary resource person, and will be guided by our moderator, Mr. Muhammad Zeqi Yasin, S.A. M.Sc. First of all, allow me to read the curriculum vitae from Mr. Muhammad Zeqi Yasin, S.A. M.Sc. Here is a CV from our moderator. First, personal identity. His name is Muhammad Zeqi Yasin. For the education, he take Master of Science in Applied Economics and Data Analysis at University of Essex. Number two, Bachelor of Economics in Development Economics at University of Erlangga, Indonesia. From the third point, employment history. First, Department of Economic, University of Jember, Indonesia as a lecturer. Second, Research Institute of Socio-Economic Development, Rice, Indonesia as head of research. Third, Department of Economic, University of Erlangga, Indonesia as non-tenured lecturer. Fourth, Deputy Macro of Finance of Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs Indonesia as analyst. Fifth, Institute for Business Development and Incubation, University of Erlangga as part-time staff. For the organization experience, first, Association of Sharia Economic Studies, Axis, University of Erlangga as head of research and paper. Second, Eco-Campus Faculty of Economics and Business, University of Erlangga as head of science. For the research of output, here are some of his publications. Next, we have awards and achievement. First, Indonesian Endowment Fund for Education, LPDP, Ministry of Finance Indonesia as awardee of Master Degree Scholarship 2017. Second, University of Erlangga, Indonesia as Achievement Graduate 2017. Third, Yogyakarta Muhammadiyah University of Indonesia, the best presenter of Second International Conference of Islamic Economic and Finance 2017. Fourth, University of Indonesia as first place of Sharia Economic Day 2014. Fifth, Ministry of Education Indonesia as Bidik-Misi Scholarship Awardee for Undergraduate 2013. For the academic reviews, as first, as Assistant Professor of University of Essex, United Kingdom. Second, as Lecturer and Head of Undergraduate Economics Program, University of Erlangga. Third, as Researcher and Lecturer of Department of Economics, University of Erlangga. We have arrived at the core of event of the International Virtual Course by Development Economics Program, University of Jember, with the theme Sustainable Natural Resource, which of course all of us have been waiting for. Furthermore, I will leave this forum to the moderator to guide the course of today's discussion. To Mr. Muhammad Zeqi Yasin, SA M.Sc, I invite you.
All right. Thank you for the MC of the event today. My name is Muhammad Zeqi Yasin, and I'm the lecturer of Department of Economics, University of Jember. And I'm in charge as a moderator today in this discussion. And as scheduled by the committee, we have two remarkable speakers. And the first speaker is very prominent in the energy economics, namely Professor Budy Prasetyo Resosudarmo from the Crawford School of Public Policy, Australian National University. And the second speaker is Dr. Salut Muhidin, Ph.D. From the Macquarie University, Australia. All right, we may embark our discussion today, but beforehand, I'd like to read the CV of our speaker, our first speaker. For our first speaker, Professor Budy Resosudarmo, have you been with us now? Have you joined?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And our second speaker?
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'd like to read out the CV for the first speaker today. All right, Professor Budy Prasetyo Resosudarmo pursued his PhD in 1996 from Cornell University, USA, and gained his M.Sc in Operation Research from the University of Delaware, USA, and gained his Electrical Engineering Bachelor of Science from Bandung Institute of Technology, Indonesia. And he surely has a lot of publications or research or book chapters, but I'd like to read out the latest one from in 2021, which entitled Land Property Right and Food Insecurity in Cambodia, which has been published in Regional Science Policy and Practice in the volume of 13. And another, his research is entitled Digitalization and the Performance of Micro and Small Enterprises in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, which has been published by Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies. All right, let me reach out another one. And he also has published the book chapters, which just published in 2022, entitled Implication of his Asia Electricity Market Integrations on Southeast Asia Economies and CO2 emission. So our speaker today is really prominent at the topic that we will be discussed very soon. All right, Professor Budy, without further ado, I'd like to let you deliver materials today. Professor Budy, the screen is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Mas. First of all, I would like to thank Faculty of Economics, University of Jember for the invitation. I appreciate that. And it's good to learn that the Faculty of Economics, University of Jember keep progressing and conducting various international events. So my talk today will be a very basic to the topic on natural resource and sustainable development. Will be delivered by other speaker like Prof. Salut and the other two speaker, I believe, tomorrow. But my talk will be to motivate you on to prepare you in enhancing knowledge on resource economics, resource or environmental economics. So I was told that most of the audience are undergraduate students. So I picked a very basic topic. So then for those who would like to enhance through the studies and become a good economist, these are the things that you might want to know. So let me share my screen. So I will discuss why empirical method is important in economics, and particularly in environmental economics, and what you guys need to know. And so then when you decided to learn more about economics, you have some direction. This is the way that I need to prepare myself. Yeah. And if it is not within your program, it is not available, you still can thinking, well, maybe in the next level of study, I will direct myself to that direction. So first of all, let's discuss some history, economics and social science. Yeah, economics is certainly part of social science. Yeah, since it's basically a science on relation among individual and society, which is all social sciences are about that. However, economics separate as a distinct branch of science, probably with the publication of Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations in 1776. So economics becoming a distinct social science. This distinction strengthening by several others people or academics such as David Ricardo, Karl Marx, Thomas Malthus, that basically separate more economics from the other social science. One of the distinctions are as follows. One is that economics becoming more and more analytic, although at the time it's still qualitative, yeah, but it is analytic. And within this analytic, the relationship that most economics care are if-then relationship. Yeah. Economics, that is the heart of economic thinking, is this if-then relationship. Economists typically want to know if price increase, what happened with the economy, or if there is a shock, what happened on the economy. So that is something that distinct economic from other social science. Other social science might not thinking about the relationship between individual within society with an if-then relation, but economists does. So remember that point. The center of economic thinking is this if-then relationship. We care about what happened if a certain thing happened, and so on. Yeah, if, for example, we do this policy, what is happening with the society? Yeah. Now, next, I will move. Oops. Okay. All right. So, is this, yeah. Now, within this math relationship, economics trying to formalize how can I answer if-then relationship in a more exact way. And when they want to do it more exactly, they bring mathematics in the economics. And this is happening in 1800. One of the beginner or one of the people that start bringing mathematics into the economics is Van Tunen, Cornell, and Walras. It is not happening obviously in other social science. The main thing is why it's not happening in other social science is that because other social science not always thinking in that if-then relationship, but economists thinking about if-then relationship. So if this happen, what is it on the other parameter that we care? And mathematics are very natural in explaining those things because that is the basic thing of equation. All equations are explaining one variable on the left-hand side using the other right-hand side variable. Now, so then mathematics still become more and more involved in the economics, and by 1900, mathematics is basically dominates the field of economics. And one of the domination is through math formulation, and second is through statistics. And the people that responsible bringing up both, bringing up the math, deduction math into economics is people like Charlie Kupan, Kenneth Arrow, and Paul Samuelson, while those who bring the statistic into the economics that becoming an econometric are people like Ragnar Fritsch, Jan Tienberg, and Simon Kuznets. So up until this point, I hope everyone understands why economics is dominated by math and statistics. Okay, I repeat it again. The main thing is that the framework, the key framework of economic thinking is if-then relation. And it is very natural to adopt mathematics on this if-then concept, because in math, we always deal with equation. An equation is basically telling if right-hand side variable is something like this, what happened with the left-hand side variable. So if blah, 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 then the left-hand side variable. Now, the domination on math into economics, there are two types of math. One is this deterministic math, which is the math deduction math. And the other one is this statistic that's becoming a new field called econometrics. Now, let's go through a bit more on this if-then relationship. Now, because of this then relationship, and we put it into a math concept, then economics start dealing with what we call it models. Yeah. So economics is using models. It could be a statistical model or a deterministic model, but the economics are using model to explain if-then relationship. Why economic use model? Because it is a simpler way to explain a complex social interaction. Yeah. In principle, model is not always math, but math is often able to clarify the complex relationship and ensure that logical conclusions are deduced. Type provides statistic measure on how true a relationship and how accurate it is. So that is, now we see why economics is actually obsessed with math, statistics, and model. So a good program, a good economic program should always provide good knowledge or good background to the student on math and statistics. Without teaching economics, without good math or good statistic courses, then it won't provide a good foundation for the person to enhance for further study in economics. Because the deeper you are in economics, the more you involve in model, and you always have to deal with math or statistics. So that's why I always suggest in some in Indonesia that for undergraduates, it is better to take calculus 1, calculus 2 from the math department and probability 1, statistic 1 from the statistic department, rather than the faculty economics teaching it through economics, mathematics economics. It does not give, based on experience, it does not give a strong foundation for the student. Next, I will now, within math and statistics, this Venn diagram kind covering the broad possibilities. So on the left-hand side is a pure math, and it's becoming this economic theory. Just deducing model into some equation and come up with a theory. So the deduction cannot be argued because math deduction is exact. What is important is to look at the assumption when the model is set up. Once it's set up, deduction could not be argued, and you come up with a statement becoming an economic theory. Yeah. So that is the nice thing with this mathematical deterministic, because the deduction you cannot argue. Yeah, it is nicely deducted and it is nicely logically deduced. So then the final equation that you get is not supposed to be arguable. So the argument is on the assumption. And the right hand side over here is the pure stats. They do not really care about the economic theory, but they could implement the right statistic, and it is now becoming what so-called impact evaluation group. Now between them, it is called a structural model. So the structural model is that the equation was deduced based on mathematical deterministic, but the parameterization was conducted by a statistic. And there are more other in between, but this is just a simplification. Math and statistics involved in economics into this framework. One is on the left-hand side is purely only deterministic stats, yeah, a deterministic math, then becoming an economic theory. And on the right-hand side is purely statistic, but a proper statistic, and now becoming an impact evaluation. I will discuss these three models and give an example later on what they are. Now, as I mentioned before, in this equation, there are two approaches, basically. One is a single equation approach, and you need to argue that this is a reduced form, could come from a multiple equation, but it has been a reduced form, and require an exogeneity of the right-hand side variable. Parameterization, if you have an exogeneity in the right-hand side variable, parameterization is well developed. There is a statistic. And if you set up it properly, you can have a causal relationship. Simple to establish whatever a certain policy have an impact on a variable of interest. The other approach within this math and statistics in economics is this system of multiple equations, sometimes called as a system of structural equations, strongly based typically from economic theory, could contain complicated structure, and could emphasize on how and sequence could observe an impact of a certain policy on several variables of interest. Now that sometimes we need it when we talk about sustainable development. We interested in at least three variables, which is economics, environment, and social equity. However, the parameterization is sophisticated. Yeah? And many times the parameterization is actually using a guesstimate. So people are actually guessing those parameterization. And one of the biggest structural model is typically a general equilibrium model. Now, as I mentioned, the beginning in math came in 1980s. First is that this in a group of people introducing it through a simple equation, come up with a simple statistic, although emerging, becoming an econometric. But in 1990s and in 1980s and in 1990s, the field of economics is really dominated by math deterministic. Yeah. So these are people like Paul Samuelson, Kenneth Arrow, Challenging Goodman. So if you take a PhD in 1990s, the main one are all math. Yeah. Now and now if you take in a good school, they still give you those courses, which is micro and macro, purely a math courses. And so that's why I keep reminding all, if you would like to study, take math. Yeah, calculus 1, calculus 2, and advanced calculus, which is the real analysis and probability and pure statistic, to be able to follow the development of economics. Yeah? Now, so that is what happened in 1980s and 1990s. If you take a course in good school, a course in economics in a good school, what you get is a math course, basically. Now, so that is the situation. However, and this in resource economics is produced what we use dynamic model. I will give you an example on that. Firm pollution model, pollution dispersion model, generic Rubium, bioeconomic model, cost benefit transfer. Now, contingent valuation is basically grow up later on after this math model. Now, well, but in 2000, things are happening, and there is a shift between the domination of deterministic math toward more empirical math or statistics. And these are because of the work people like James Heckman, Angus Deaton, and David Card. So they all received a Nobel Prize. And finally, it's becoming a quantitative impact evaluation in 2010s by people, proposed by people such as Banerjee, Duflo, and Kramer. They all got a Nobel Prize in 2019. So there's a swing in 2010. Yeah. Initially, both math and statistics came. Yeah. But then in 80s and 90s, the economic is dominated by deterministic math, and 2010 is switched into a more empirical, and at the extreme, it is an impact evaluation technique. Why this swing could happen? Well, initially, why math could dominate? Economists trying to explain what happened in the society, but data are not available. So because data is so bad, the only way that they could do to be precise is go to math deterministic. So that is why economic theory becoming all this math deterministic. But in 2010, a lot of data available around the world, and people start be interested on empirical and doing the right empirical technique, and this is what we call impact evaluation. Administrative data becoming openly publicly available in many countries. Yeah. Industrial survey data is also becoming more available. And household survey, particularly household survey. This is like RFLS, Indonesia Family Life Survey, or Susenas, becoming more available across the world. And so empirical study is actually becoming more and more, and by now is actually dominate the field of economics. And on the extreme, what they do is this impact evaluation. So this is also why the beginning of econometric course is focused on impact evaluation. Yeah, it's not too complicated like we do before, working on a lot of different techniques outside OLS. But impact evaluation is more on how we set up the experiment or the quasi experiment so we could implement OLS properly. ordinarily squared properly. I will discuss that a bit more. So all these people that make empirical economics is dominate the field of economics has receiving a Nobel Prize. And so the question is that 2020 and after that, where the economics will go. Yeah. Could be swing back to the left, yeah, but not going to the economic theory, but somewhere between economic and statistics, which is what we call the structural model. Now, however, wherever these things will swing, undergraduate students should be prepared. So then they are ready to enhance their knowledge whenever the economics field are swinging. So the field of science and economics is not static. What you learned 10 years ago might not be the one that we should learn right now. So when I did my PhD, all what I learned is math, but now what I do is impact evaluation, basically. Now, to be able to follow all this swing, undergraduate should be prepared. And in the United States, there's 2 years, and everybody is basically just a general science student. So they take math from the math department, they take stat from the stat department, and so on. In Indonesia, probably only some institute like Bogor Institute of Agriculture doing that. That is the first year that everybody is actually taking math from the math department, or Bandung Institute Technology. But many university is actually very disaggregated. So Faculty of Economics only take courses from the economic department. Faculty of Politics and Social Science only take courses from the Faculty of Economics. That is not the way that there's no effective in preparing our students so then they could engage further on the development of science. So I always recommend, if you have an opportunity, I think a free course that you could take anywhere, and if you thinking to enhance your knowledge in economics, take math and statistics from the Department of Math and Department of Statistics. That probably give you the best foundation. Now, I move now, what is impact evaluation? How is different than the typical econometric model? So the previous model on econometric is something like this. So we have a bunch of variable X over here, and we would like to know what is the effect of H, X toward Y. Yeah? This could be what is the effect of education on regional growth and so on. And this variable what a lot. And a typical question that we ask is, what is the determinant of Y? Yeah. So what is the determinant of regional growth? What is the determinant of poverty alleviation? And you have a bunch of variable and you test the T statistic, which one is significant, and then you argue that that variable is important and that variable is. But the main problem, and this was founded in 1980s and beginning of 1990s, a lot of this equation contain a bias, particularly that X is not exogenously, cannot be assumed exogenous in determining Y. So meaning that X is got an endogeneity issue, and it is very typical. Almost 80% of econometric work at that time was mentioned got this endogeneity issue. And the impact evaluation is basically a technique to correct this endogeneity problem, and so we could get causal relationship. if this is not exogenously random, then what you have is the most association, but association is not interesting. So why we would like to have a causal relationship? Yeah. Well, number one, policymaker really want to know what is the effect of their policy on the outcome. Yeah. So they would like to know the change of a policies on the change of outcomes. So, and to do that, you could only have it the correct alpha if you have causal relationship between P and Y, not association. Yeah. And people like Bernard-G, Duflo, Carla, and Kramer is basically arguing that this is the way we need to go, having a causal relationship. Now, let's discuss quickly what is endogeneity problem. Why, if we have endogeneity, that we actually could not get causal relationship between a variable on the right-hand side to the left-hand side. This is a quick. So now the way that we set up to make sure that what we have a causal relationship, we reformulate our econometric model into something like this. So we just focus on one policy. We focus on one policy and put others as control. Yeah. And then we would like to know what is the effect of change in P toward Y. And there are requirements that X has to have, but let's focus on this. Make sure the setup of P is correct, and X is basically only to control for sample selection. Yeah? But we need to make sure that P is exogenously random in this relationship. P would have an endogeneity issue if there are three things happening. One is omitted confounding variable. Yeah, so there is other variable that's supposed to be in the equation but not in the equation. There is a measurement error of P. Yeah, and there is a simultaneity problem. Yeah, if there is three, you have it in this equation, you have this endogeneity problem. So that is why all paper right now is no longer titled what is the determinant for poverty, for example, or what is the determinant on regional development, but they are saying one variable on the right hand side. So what is the determinant of cash transfer on poverty? Yeah. Although in the equation there are several other controls, but people are doing like that. What is the determinant on education on regional growth? Yeah. So it has been changed because they would like to make sure that the cash transfer is randomly exogenous, so then it could get causal relationship with, for example, poverty alleviation. Yeah. So let's discuss a bit more on what is it omitted confounding variable. Okay, so this is omitted confounding. Suppose the true variable is you need to have Z. Yeah. So for example, you would like to know the effect of human quality or human education on regional growth, but you need to know you have a government budget in that region, but you don't have it. And so what you estimate is just this relationship. Yeah. Without the government budget, without Z. Now, if Z is basically in the error term because it's not in the equation, so this part becoming an error term. If P is correlated with Z and Z is also correlated with Y, or you can say that Z correlated with both P and Y, so it become a confounding variable, and you do not include in your estimation, then your estimation, the alpha estimate, is not the true alpha. Yeah. So the first problem is if you have what we call it omitted confounding variable, then you get an indigeneity issue. If you do cross section, most likely you get this problem unless you set up in a certain way. Yeah. Now the second problem is what we call measurement error. This is also very common. So the measurement error is, for example, you would like to measure human quality and you use average year school attainment. Yeah, because you do not have measurement on human quality. So what you have is average schooling. Yeah, and so you do this estimate. For example, this is average schooling, and you interpret it as human quality on regional growth. And so then the noise that you have, because what you want is actually human quality, the noise that you have then in the error term. And if this noise is correlated with P and Y at the same time, then your estimate over here is not the true relationship between human quality and regional development. This is what we call measurement error. And measurement error happen and very difficult to correct actually. When you trying to measure, for example, the effect of corruption on regional development, you get a measurement error in measuring corruption, most likely. If you want to on the effect of even cash transfer on poverty alleviation, you probably get measurement error on the cash transfer because we are not sure that the cash transfer is 100% received by the poor or not. So all these things could always happen. Now, the third problem is simultaneity. So if it can be argued that it is not P explaining Y, but Y explaining P, then your estimate is also biased. So for example, you would like to see the effect of regional development on poverty. Well, what could happen is actually reduction of poverty, increased regional development, and so you have a simultaneity problem. So then you have indigeneity problem. So remember, the impact evaluation is trying to solve this problem with a proper econometric technique. Now, so that is the main thing that you need to learn when you learn econometric these days. Now, how to really solve it? I will go quickly on how people are usually solve it. So in the empirical strategy, this is called an identification strategy. You argue or ensure that your P is a random and exogenous variable. You could argue verbally, but you could also do some treatment. But on top of that, you need to set up your equation following a certain setup. So then you could argue could be as good as random. And people do, then you can do the mean estimation, and then you test the robustness whether your identification strategy is actually correct, and people do extended analysis. So the first identification strategy that people use, and this is the golden rule that people do these days, and this is the one that is proposed by Banerjee, Duvlo, and Kramer, is the RCT, the randomized control trials design. Yeah. Basically, the way that you would like to test whether an economic policy is working or not, you need to randomly assign them into two groups of people. One is the control group, which is the group that randomly chosen but not receiving the treatment or the policies, and the treated group, where the randomly selected people that you give the treatment. And the way that you do the analysis is just the average treatment effect is the difference between the average outcome of those who get a treatment minus those who are in the control. Yeah. So remember, now the work on statistic or econometric is not directly writing the equation, but first think about how these policies implement, yeah, or this phenomena is actually implemented. You need to start before you do writing an equation. You need to think about how you set up the problem. Yeah. And the golden rule is setting up by RCT. Okay. Now, however, there are problems with RCT. It's not perfect. That is called external validity. You do experiment into a certain group, but we don't know if it is to the overall population. There is a spillover, there is an attrition bias, and so on. Yeah. Now, for this RCT, one statistic that you need to learn, I don't know whether you learn it, I know in econometric or not, is designing sample size and power. It's a very basic concept. Statistic 101 teach you that, but the usual econometric might not teach you that. How we define sample size and how we or relate those sample size with power. So power is the ability to reject H null. Yeah. Now, so that is the first setup. When you want to do research, think whether you could do the research in a setup of RCT, because there is a golden rule right now. It has some issue, but if you properly design your experiment, it cannot be argued. It is a causal relationship. Yeah. Now, so that is the first thing. The second thing that you need to learn is what we a group of quasi experiments. Yeah? It's not experiment, but we could treat it as experiment. And the first type of quasi experiment is natural experiment. So the natural experiment is we observe a random event that by nature it is random. So for example, there's a study on the effect of rain, or how heavy rain when someone born to their human capital achievement in later life. Yeah. So there is a famous paper on Indonesia looking at that by Din Yang. Yeah. They argue that how heavy the rain when someone born is random and it's exogenous. Nobody can control it. And so looking at those relationships with the education achievement in later life, it's exogenously random. So, there is a paper in Vietnam look at the effect of a U.S. bomb during the Vietnam War on village development. They argue that where the bomb is actually felt is actually random. Yeah. So this is a random process. Nobody really controls it, and the effect of village development 20 years later is certainly exogenously random. So that is one example of a natural experiment. So it is part of a quasi-experiment. However, there is not many. What is the policy if that we could implement? So that is the weakness. It's not so much interested. Yeah. And the other second is that well, there's a screening process. People location might not be random. So that is the one first quasi experiment that you need to think when you do a research in this field of environmental economics. And a lot of environment is actually related to this. For example, natural hazard, the effect of natural hazard on development. Yeah, so that is in environmental economics, there are a lot of this setup that people use. The third technique is difference and difference. Yeah. So basically, you observe the situation before. There is a group that you observe. This group do not get treatment. This group is receiving treatment. However, they are not really random. The RCT is random. These two groups are not really random. And this group are having the treatment. You observe after the treatment implement, and you see the difference. So the difference is not this. If you observe only in this period, you see this. Yeah, the difference between this group and this group is not really the effect of the policy. The effect of the policy is only this one, because this one is the trend. So doesn't matter that is policy or not, there is already initial difference. And so this initial difference is not the difference of the policy, but the policy is impact is this one. And over here is this variable. So this is T, the time, and this is the policy. This is the time, which is 0 and 1. And this is the interaction between time and a policy. Yeah. Now, difference and difference, very important. I need to mention that requirement is parallel trend. So you need to show that before receiving a treatment, there is a parallel trend. That actually this distance is actually persistent. Yeah. They have several weaknesses, but if you could do this, at least you are having the right setup. Again, I keep reminding you, in the empirical work and in the economic thinking, when you want to test economic thinking into an empirical, and it is important because if you're not being able to show it empirically, there is no evidence. You need to think about the setup. It's not the equation. I'm going to do OLS. I'm going to do fixed effect. I'm going to do, non-linear or Cox box model. No, the first thing is how I'm going to set up my experiment or my quasi experiment. Different than different is also quasi experiment. So that is, remember. So in econometric, you need to learn this one. Now, there are several others that we could consider quasi-experiment if it is properly set up, which is one is discontinued event or becoming regression discontinuity design. Panel fixed effect. Remember, panel fixed effect, panel random effect, nobody using it anymore. And instrumental variable. But instrumental variable is very difficult right now. You need to fulfill 3 requirements: relevant assumption, exchangeability or independent assumption, and exclusion restriction. You need to make sure that you follow those things. So that is the impact evaluation. Now, think when you're going to study economics, and particularly environmental economics, have you had the right foundation or not? If you're not having the right foundation, find yourself to get the right foundation, either attending online courses, which is there is available around the world, if your school do not provide this knowledge. Yeah, because when you take a master or PhD in a good university, they will require you to get this basic. All right, so now we move to what is it? Economic theory, example of economic theory in resource economics. So I give you a very simple example. Well, the most famous one in environmental economics on this economic theory is the derivation of hoteling rule. And it is for non-renewable resources. Yeah. And how the simple way that people do that, this hoteling. So this is an example. I will go through only 5 minutes doing this. So R is the initial reserve that we have. This is, for example, coal, oil, and so on. And RT is the reserve in the period of T. So, and Q is the number of resources that you extract at a period or a year T. So then RT plus 1, which is the resource next year, is the level of reserve this year, or this is the reserve next year, is the level of reserve this year, minus you take it out. Yeah, so this relationship is the dynamic relationship. And T is the time. And pi is a strictly concave benefit function. This is the benefit function. And let's assume that during the whole contract that you have, you have this contract to mine the area, you will take all of them. So you will take all of them. So each year you take QT, but at the end, from 0 to T, you take all of them. And we would like to maximize this benefit from extracting the reserve. We know that we cannot extract it directly, but we need to spread it out through time. And what is the strategy, which is the hoteling rule, is the strategy, how much you're going to extract each year. And so the way that you do is you set up a maximization problem. This is a dynamic optimization. You maximize the benefits multiplied by the discount factor for each year, and you sum it from 0 to T. And you get it. This is in T is equal to 0. This is next year. You need to discount it. Discount it is the same as 1 plus delta, or this is the interest rate, plus blah, 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 blah. You would like to maximize those equations subject to the dynamic equation, which is this one, basically R0 minus all the amount that you take it each year. And to solve this maximization, now we transfer it into a static, is using a Lagrangian function. So that is something that you need to learn. And in the dynamic, we call it extended Lagrangian, which is basically Lagrange said that when you won't have this problem is equal to maximizing a Lagrangian function, which is the objective plus mu. This is a Lagrange variable multiplied by the constraint. And maximizing this function is equal to maximizing that function. So that is basically what Lagrangian said, and he proved it. And we know that maximizing this, you need to find the extreme point. Well, the extreme point is where the slope is equal to 0. So if the slope is positive, you know it is increasing. When the slope is negative, you know it's declining. So the extreme point is when the slope is 0. And the slope is 0 is when the first derivation of the equation is equal to 0. So you derive the first equation and toward the variables. This is one toward Q and the other one is toward mu. And you have this equation. And this is containing a lot of equation. Now, so you know that the extreme point is maximum only if this is concave. If this is strictly concave, you got it. But if it is not strictly concave, you could get a problem. Yeah. Those maths on the optimization available in calculus 2 typically. So I encourage you to take calculus 1 typically on linear algebra, calculus 2 are on function. So then you derive it from this derivation, you get P basically equal to every year you have the marginal value of extracting each year is equal to the marginal value extracting next year discounted. And suppose that the marginal value is PT, so you could substitute this equation. So you have this formula, and this formula could be modified into this one, and you have this hoteling rule. Basically, the hoteling rule say that the optimal prices of non-renewable if this price difference is equal to the discount factor. So that is the derivation. Now, so once it's got over here, you cannot argue whether this hoteling rule is wrong, because the derivation, the math derivation, is precise. This math derivation is precise. What you could argue is whether this setup is actually correct or not. Whether people are actually maximizing society benefit, whether the mining activity could be treated as a sole owner. This is like a sole owner, only one person, they're basically maximizing all, or it is not. Yeah. So the economic theory, basically, the art of economic theory is setting up this equation. From this through go down is a mechanic. Yeah, something that you need to learn in calculus 1, calculus 2. So, and if you want to go proofing, you need to take advanced calculus, or in this case, is real analysis. Now, but once it is already over here, you cannot argue anymore. The hoteling rule is this, basically. You could also keep deriving the hoteling rule until you get a formula of extraction, basically this one. So this derivation is also cannot be argued. It is an exact math, and this is what economist theories do when we don't have yet data in the beginning, in 1980s and in 1990s. So all the work are this deduction. This is an example. Now, I will move to an example of a structural before I ended this presentation, is that this is an example of bioeconomic model in Indonesian fishery, in which I set up the maximization, and this fishery can be catch by the fish, the flying fish. You can eat the fish, but you could also eat the egg. So this is the egg and the fish. So each time you harvest, you actually could get two. And the way that you do it is using a technique called pakaja. And this is a society benefit. You would like to maximize it through infinity. Yeah. And then you do the estimation of the bioeconomic. And this one is in the structural model. Sometimes the estimation is not perfect, but they still allow you. And so you got this bioeconomic model, and then you do estimation, the empirical, the function in the optimization. You do estimate based on some data. So you get the estimation, and then you derive the equation. You derive the equation, and later on, using a computable software for optimization. In this case, I use GAMS, General Algebraic Model. I find the solution. So this is the optimal harvest. So meaning that at 1 year, you need to stop harvest, and then the first year you could harvest, and these are the possibilities. So there is a structural model. The structural model is combining both math deduction with an econometric, but the econometric is not as perfect as impact evaluation. Several things has still been allowed to do it, because what we need is in this estimation for the structural is best fit. So best fit is always look at the R square. It's not paying much attention on T, but the R square. So this is the best fit. And the causality of this one toward this come from the setup at the beginning of the setup. See? So when you do structural, the causality relationship was set up in the beginning of the model. There are some assumptions. You could argue that the assumption is wrong, but that is. And then you do derivation and you do the parameterization using an econometric, but you don't need to argue for causality using the impact evaluation technique, because you have it already over here. Now, a lot of people doesn't like structural. That's why it is either in economic theory or purely math, or impact evaluation or purely stat. But who knows? A better technique, a better compromise between math and statistics could produce better structural model for the future. So
Professor,
that is, yeah. So
you have 2 minutes left.
Yeah. Okay. So almost done. So I've been mentioned that the main thing driving economic science as well as environmental economics from economic theory to impact evaluation is the role of data. Now, however, there are people who are not satisfied with the impact evaluation because you could only come up with a simple relationship. There are a lot of complex relationships that you cannot simply do by RCT. And so there's a question whether we are going to go back over here. But on the other hand, there is a new data coming up that might push us stay on the impact evaluation. And the new type of data is this big data. Big data basically an umbrella term for large digital data that continues collected from the global population. And we haven't yet used this data. Well, we use this data already, but we haven't used as much as household data. More and more, there are issues with this data, because it's not taken randomly. And so there's a new technique that needs to be developed to be able to analyze this data. I give some example. And the most important thing on this big data, there's an example as well, is the new technique. And the new technique that people are looking right now is machine learning. It's part of statistics, part of computer science, but people are searching whether this technique are able to resolve the issue of big data. And so being able to properly use big data and to do an impact evaluation. And so then we will see that the economic will be still in the impact evaluation world for the next 10 to 20 years before it swing back to another direction. We don't really know. However, as a student in economics, you need to start thinking where I could learn machine learning. So I give you a message, if you would like to be a good economist, particularly a good academician in economics, you need to have math, you need to have stat, and now you need to have machine learning. One of the very basic thing about machine learning is learn Python. Yeah, that's the language that you need to learn, Python. So that is my main message. Hopefully I open up your mind to, willing to learn more and seek outside your university. If your university not offering this, look around, because your development is not bounded by your university. Yeah. So, and for young faculty member, hopefully this lecture, this short lecture, could also make you think when you're going to do a PhD, what you need to prepare and where you're going to get your PhD. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for very insightful material that have been delivered by Professor Budy. So I let the audience who have questions, maybe I'd like to, we have about 25 minutes for the discussion, and I will open the first 3 questions, and afterward, Professor Budy will answer the question. You can use the feature of raise hand, or you can type in your question in the chat box. So yeah, any question? Please raise your hand. Is there any question? Okay, maybe they are typing the question, Professor. So maybe I'd like to like stimulate the question first, because Professor has already delivered about the topic of the basic and fundamental economics. So maybe I'd like to ask about, you know, the economics is related to the assumption, Professor. My question is like, to which extent we can assume something on economics when we conduct research or something like that?
Okay. So those economic, so that is the one word of economics. So when economics using a lot of math, it need to set up all these assumptions. And this guy on impact evaluation actually criticized those things. Well, we don't really need to do those assumptions. What we need to know is there is a causal relationship between an equation. So if you go to the impact evaluation people, they are not discussing all this assumption, but they see this relationship is causal relationship, and causal relationship could be happen if you do the setup of either RCT or quasi experiment. So yes, when we learn the economic theory, we still need to use assumption, and whether we could argue with the assumption or not is still debatable. But the people in empiric is actually trying to prove it, whether those assumption is correct or not, or whether we do need that assumption or not. So for example, one is the very famous debate is on this minimum wage. Yeah. A lot of economic theory using a certain assumption, doing maximization, show that minimum wage is actually creates increasing unemployment. You know. But there are empirical work that set up minimum wage as exogenous and random and show that, well, it's not always the case. See? So the empirical work is actually testing whether those theory that is deduced by assumption is actually right or not. So if you ask me how much we could actually use those assumptions, it depends on how much empirical has been shown that the assumption is correct. As long as there is the empirical work is actually show that the assumption is correct, then that's it. Yeah. But one of the problem right now is not all the economic theory that using the assumption can be tested with the RCT. So that is one of the issue. And so that is why there is a movement to move from RCT toward something else. So you could actually combine assumption and proper econometric. So then you argue that your assumption is basically okay.
Okay,
Next.
thank you, Professor, for the answer. All right, for the audience. Okay, Mr. Bagus Narendra.
Okay. Before I want to ask, thank you for this opportunity. We from Directorate of Food and Agriculture of National Development Planning Agency, or Bappenas, for giving us an invitation to attend to the international virtual course. We apologize on this occasion. Mr. Anang, as the director, could not attend to this event because he was attending another event. So my first question is about what is the role of government in the dimension of this topic. Maybe for Prof. Budy say it's for policymakers, right? How about systematic or critical system? Can you explain in the method program or what else? Thank you.
Can I have the second question together? There's somebody else.
Yeah, Mr. Bagus, you can convey your second question.
No, not Mr. Bagus. There's another one. FEB Herman.
Oh yeah, Mr. Herman.
Thank you for opportunity session for MC, Mr. Zeqi Yasin. Professor Budy, thank you very much for course material and on the basic quantitative analysis of natural resources. I have any question, Prof. Budy. In institution and the oral lecturer in my institution study program have to approach to analysis methods, namely quantitative, and qualitative, and also can be used qualitative approach to determine how to natural resources and in sustainable manner, especially in the file of stock and quality of natural resources. Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Budy.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Herman.
Yeah. So the question on government, I will give it to the next speaker, Professor Salut, to answer it because he will talk about the topic. I'm just talking about the basic and trying to motivate students in the Faculty of Economics to study more on economics and how to prepare it. Now, there's a question on the second question is where is the role of qualitative analysis in economics? So qualitative analysis is right now typically is conducted for a pre-analysis, yeah, a pre-analysis. But when it's come to policy, what we want is an evidence. So economists typically right now are talking about evidence-based policy, and it's difficult to come up with a qualitative technique on evidence-based. And so the qualitative analysis was now is typically is conducted to develop the hypothesis, but then you need to prove it with quantitative or with an empirical technique. Now, if you ask me whether you could do, for example, qualitative research for a master thesis in economics department or a master thesis or a PhD thesis in economic department right now, in a good university, most likely you cannot. You cannot come up with a qualitative analysis in economics department these days in good university. So you do need to go to empirical. So that's why if you would like to go to a good university for your master or your PhD, you need to be familiar with math and statistics. So that's why for the Faculty of Economics, I would suggest that allowing your student to take math and statistics in the Department of Mathematics and in the Department of Statistics is the best way to go in preparing your student for their future development.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Budy, for the answer. So for the question from the Mr. Bagus will be answered for the second speaker. Is that right, Professor?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So we also have the questions in the chat box from Miss Chika Karisma Piga from Universitas Nusa Cendana. How does financial markets contribute to the economy of the country? And the next question is from Mrs. Amelia Ventiliani Hilma from FEB UNC Kupang. What are the problems of developing countries in the face of increasing digital technology, and what efforts need to be made in order to compete in the digital economy era?
Okay, so I will so the role. Okay, so I will answer it in a slight different way. So I will put the question in a different way. So then it is aligned with what I'm talking about. So, for example, so the first one and the second one, what will be the role of development of financial market and digital technology in development of empirical economic or empirical environmental economics. So, well, on the digital part, I have mentioned that that gives us a new data for analysis, which is the big data, which is basically a very big data that available, for example, through mobile phone, through satellite data, and so on. However, there are some specific issue with the data. So, for example, on mobile phone and so on, it is not random. They basically has a selection issue, and in many places, all these digital data are actually creating opportunity, but at the same time creating problem. And so there is a need to develop a better technique, and statistic is probably not enough. So then combination between statistics and computer science is probably needed, and this is what people talking about. And one subject that they develop is this called a machine learning technique. So machine learning is doing kind of algorithm so that the data that has that problem could be treated as good as random. Now, the same thing as the financial sector, the development of financial sector is creating a new data system. So for example, if you could access credit card, you could see consumption pattern of a family. And this credit card is continue, and it's much faster, much bigger data set than, for example, household survey. But household survey, you do it randomly. So you have this randomly, which is, that is important, because you, to be able to create a causality, you need to have a random process. Besides exogenous, you need to have a random process. Now, financial sector data, digital economy data is not random. So you need to correct that things. And the way to correct it, you need a different technique. You cannot use the typical statistic technique. You need to use something else. And that you need to learn. And prepare yourself to learn it. And so yeah. And remember, those things right now, if you would like to learn Python, you don't need to have a class on Python in your university. You could take an online course on Python. Yeah, even like calculus 1, calculus 2. Right now there are online course available. Some of the big universities actually providing those online. So one of the famous online series of online courses is EDX. Yeah, EDX is produced by Harvard. Yeah, you could actually those things. Now, good if your university could provide it, or good if your university could actually uh, uh, produce those courses. So, and in many cases, so for example, in my university, all PhD student in economics typically has to take GIS, Geographic Information System, but there is no course. The course in GIS is in different faculty, but we don't need all the GIS that they teach. So what we do is that we actually conducting a series of short course on GIS. So there are packet of 6 short course on GIS in my department. So then all PhD students in my department could work with GIS. So that also a strategy that we need to develop. But what is important is that all faculty member, all faculty of economics and business in Indonesia need to watch the development of economic science. It's not a static science. It is actually keep moving, and you need to prepare your student to be able to do that. And the treating formula that I keep saying it during this course is that prepare them with good math, prepare them with good stats, and now prepare them with good computer science technique. There are the 3 basic things that need to be there in an undergraduate program. If your undergraduate program do not have those things, it's not a solid one yet. Yeah. All right. Any question?
Okay, thank you for the answer, Professor. So maybe we have last 6 minutes, maybe one question from the audience. Okay, Mr. Faris.
Okay, thank you for giving me an opportunity to ask any questions to the speaker. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Professor Budy. Let me introduce myself. I am Muhammad Faris Fauzi from Bachelor of Development Economics Program, Faculty of Economics and Business, University of Jember. Okay, I have one question for Prof. Budy. Even in economics problems using by mathematical methods, we know that externalities such as environmental or culture are often avoided. Why did it happen, Prof? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so, well, those externality issue is certainly a key on environmental economics. Yeah, but right now, this well, one is that I believe the next speaker will talk about that, because it talk about sustainable development, which is talk a lot about externality. So, however, on my topic, it is actually a big thing to prove whether externality is happening or not in environmental economics, because although it seemed to be obvious, but the proof or the evidence is not obvious. So testing externality with an empirical method is right now a big issue and a big topic in environmental economics. So, for example, the effect of this is in the case of disaster management, is whether public mitigation is actually affecting individual mitigation or not. So that is an externality issue. and it is debatable whether it is positive or negative, and then you need to use empirical technique to prove it, whether your hypothesis is right or not. So if you ask me whether externality is still the main issue in environmental economics, yes, it is. But in the world of empirical testing, it is actually also one of the big issues that people are currently working on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for Professor Budy for the answer. All right, we have run out of time. So I'd like to conclude the material that have been delivered by the Professor Budy. So basically, Professor Budy tried to address the issue, the important issue of social science that does not really think the if-then relationship, but economics does. So yeah, we have already understood about it after the Professor Budy expressed this issue. And we know Professor Budy also has addressed about the important issue of the machine learning that will be the next trend of economic research. And of course, students need to be familiar with this this method. So maybe you don't need, if your university does not provide this approach, you can use that like other media such as YouTube or other media that have been available currently. All right, thank you for Professor Budy Resosudarmo for being such insightful speakers today. So we hope that you stay healthy in this difficult situation. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Professor.
thank you, and Pamit as well.
Yeah.
Hope to see you guys sometime. Bye.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Mas Budy.
Thank you, Salut.
Thank you,
Bye.
Prof. Budy.
Thanks.
All right. For the next speaker is Dr. Salut Muhidin from Macquarie University that will deliver the materials about the 3 dimensions of sustainable development, economic and social and environmental. But beforehand, I'd like to read out the curriculum vitae of Dr. Salut Muhidin, Ph.D. Dr. Salut pursued his Doctor of Philosophy in Demography, University of Groningen, Netherlands, and is currently the senior lecturer at the Department of Management, Macquarie Business School, Macquarie University. And his research of expertise is in the business demographics, projection of population and labor market, population aging and public health, migration and skilled labor. And there are a lot of publications that have been conducted, but I'd like to mention 2 of which. In 2021, he has published a research entitled Women Empowerment in Reproductive Health, a systematic review of measurement properties, published by M.Si Women Health. And the second one is in 2020, entitled Anticipating COVID-19 Related Stigma in Survivors and Healthcare Workers, Lesson from Previous Infectious Disease Outbreaks, an integrative literature review that has been published by Psychiatry and Clinical Neurosciences. And all right, without further ado, I'd like to please our speaker today, our second speaker today, Dr. Salut. The screen is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Moderator Mas Zeqi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Is my voice okay? Yeah. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much to the committee from the Faculty of Business Economics, Jember University. And of course, I don't know whether our dean is still there, but I would like to say thank you, Ibu Isti Fadah, as a dean, and also Pak Herman, and also other vice dean, Kaprodi for the program. So I'm happy to be with you, even it is virtually. It's already afternoon in Sydney. I based in Sydney, Macquarie University, but I was once in Jember University with my colleague from Agriculture University, Dr. Johnny Aji. So it was really wonderful time to be able to visit Jember. Hopefully, in the future, I can visit once more time. Okay. Please allow me to, oh, I can't share my screen. If anyone can allow me to share the screen, that will be appreciated. So what I'm going to share basically is, it's nice is the segue transition from Professor Budy talking about the importance of quantitative and the model data for natural science. So what I'm going to give another dimension is basically, so yes, this virtual guest lecture is about the natural resources management, but mind you, there is not only that the natural we need to think about, because there are, which is basically some question already there about external variable that we need to be included or to be considered as well. Still, I can't share my screen.
Okay, the committee, please.
If we can share with like either co-host or something, that will be, or allow me to do. Oh yeah, I can do that now.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah. So I know this is the natural, sustainable natural resource management, but I would like to give an idea, because this is most of the attendants also still study about this program. So I know some of the faculty members maybe have even better experience or better expertise in this one. I just want to remind everyone else that the focus of natural resources is also not really far that we need to add with other things. In this one is, I want to look this perspective from the sustainable development perspective, which is we do have 3 dimensions: economic, social, as well as the environment. Okay. When everyone talking about sustainable development, so almost everyone, even I can't say everyone, but at least most of people already can like have an idea sustainable development from either the propaganda of sustainable development goals from United Nations, or about the climate change, about the importance of the weather temperature increase, the green gas emission, biodiversity, and so on and so on. So a lot of the issue has been linked with the sustainable development. So the question that I would like to present here is basically, so what is relationship with the natural resource management that we are talking about during this session, right? So I don't have a lot of things to discuss with you. I just want to kind of like looking at why this is, the topic is important that we need to put on the table, and then have a look about the original of sustainable development, the progress from the beginning and then until today, and then more focus in terms of 3 pillars in sustainable development itself, and then we can come up with some discussion. So Mas Zeqi, I do have like 30 or 45, 60 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So my first idea is looking at natural resources already, like Dekan as well as Professor Budy talking about. Yes, natural resources may consist of something renewable and non-renewable resources. But the question is that, do we need to manage only the natural resources? Because we know that even we talk about water, when we talk about the forests, when we talk about crude oil or land resources, still there are an actor which is kind of like human resources, and then there is a technology or kind of like financial involved, which is kind of like a capital. Okay, so in a way that we say like there are not any places in this world that can only be regarded as natural. Whether we are living in the cities or whether living in the rural area, still kind of like not only natural resources we're talking about, but we also need to involve about the human resources, the capital, or some other theory saying about the man-made. It's like a culture thing. But one or the other places may be dominated by natural resources, like when we talk about the forest. Yes, mostly only the natural thing, but still people manage and people cross by, as well as people taking care of that land, right? But in the city, mostly kind of like talking about human resources and capital and so on. So again, in the way that do we need to manage only natural resources? No, we need to kind of like to be balanced between natural resources, but also as non-natural resources, which is in this case, I can say at least three things: natural resources, human resources, and capital resources, but as well as other studies says about man-made resources, which is kind of like including culture and so on. Okay. So when I bring it up to the sustainable development, it relates with the first term, the report by Brundtland report. I'm going to talk more detail what is Brundtland report here. It's basically the lady chair during the United Nations convention or the conference talking about the environment. So in that report particular, the word of sustainable development was used. So it was defined as a development that meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. Okay, so in this way, it's basically development is a state, but also a process. The states mean kind of like you have heard that Indonesia is the still in the developing countries. Some other countries say the high development or kind of like least development. Okay, it's this kind of like the state or this the current situation, or but then it's also process because some countries kind of like moving from. That's why there is a terminology saying that leaping forward from least developed countries or from developing countries to more developed countries, right? So development has been defined as not only state, but also process. So it is a dynamic process and concept that not really static all the time. So it's kind of like moving from the other one. So if we relate with the concept that Professor Budy mentioned in the beginning about the modeling using the analytic one, yes, it is a process function of time, but also space. So we're talking about the time to times, like Indonesia in the 70s, completely different development compared with Indonesia today. India in the 70s, completely different compared with today, the same thing with other places. So it is about the time, but also space or context where we stay or which country or which region that we're talking about. So like in Jember City, for example, or even in Jakarta, not everywhere was the city area. It was kind of like still in rural area during the old time period. But have a look now. So like the place where Jember University located nowadays is almost everywhere. It's like we categorize as urban area, but maybe not in the past, in the 60 or in the 50, some part maybe still kind of like rural area. So it's the process and function of time and space. So it means the time and space, at least the scale, are important for if you're talking about development. So in short, since resources largely limited and finite, like unrenewable resources, for example, so then we need techniques that allow efficient and lasting use the availability resources in the environment, which is about talking about management, right? So sustainable development in this one is basically become a tools to help the guarantee to make sure that the continuing and long-lasting use of resources can be done. So that's basically why I bring it up this topic in terms of natural resources management on the table. I hope until now everyone with me, yeah. So some of us can like understand by the wording and explanation. Some of us understand just by looking at the figurative one. So I'm just giving you an idea here, sustainability as a process. Say, for example, time t, either today or in the past, and then comparatively time t after certain time, okay? Some process sustainability, maybe it means they stay stable like that one. So either the capacity of water, the greenhouse one, and so on is same, but other aspect may be reduced because of the time consumption, like the use of oil, the use of the gas, the use of coal, and so on. So it may no longer still there because of unrenewable of resources. Okay, some resources may be still kind of like produce again more and more, but other sources may become like it will reduce completely by time, like oil and so on. So that's basically about process one. Now, so natural resources and sustainable development, like sustainable development goal, for example, is very strongly link each other. Okay. This is just talking about at the global level. When we talk about natural resources, it is linked very much with the sustainable development. United Nations, for example, proposed about 17 goals of sustainable development, where almost half of them is basically directly environmental. In this case, if I put that natural resources more kind of like environment, it focuses in terms of addressing the sustainability of natural resources, direct or indirect, yeah, like poverty. You think that poverty linked with the natural resources? Of course. I mean, like when you live in the very poor natural resources, then a lot of people become like not living very easily. They have to kind of like finding the water, clean water far away from the place they live. They may have to find the energy, like for the electricity and so on and so on. That's kind of like also having very close relationship with the poverty level. If you want to see more directly linked, if you look at the goal number 14 and number 15, life below water, it means all the kind of like water resources, and then life on land, it's kind of like more natural resources. For example, protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystem, sustainability, manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. That's very much direct to the natural one. So in more detail, it's just this is kind of like the 17. Which one you think is not the link with the natural? Almost everything, right? Even peace and justice. When we talk about the land ownership of the local, for example, in like the new capital city, for example, we can talk about the ownership of the land from the tribe of that one. They need also kind of like peace and justice, because if we didn't look at the ownership of that one, maybe kind of like it is kind of like about peace and justice as well, right? Partnership for the goals is basically all the community partnership to kind of like support the aim for kind of like supporting of the natural resources. So direct or indirectly, still I will say that a lot of kind of like connection between the sustainable development, like United Nations goal here, with natural resources. Okay, I will answer that question later on here, the element of sustainable development. Okay. Now, I just want to give you an idea how these external factors like economic can like link with that one. Okay, thinking about the everyday life that we have, about consumption of energy, either the gas, either the electricity, either water, and so on, with our income per capita or our consumption level or our economic level. Okay, I don't think it is not surprising, but it is not surprisingly that there is a relationship. But then people say like, look like this is non-linear relationship. Sometimes kind of like quite exponential sometimes. And then in other places, maybe kind of like the more, but in general, the trend is kind of like increasing. The more you have something, the more kind of like the need you may want to have. Okay, so like for example, if you live on the kind of like for this is a logarithmic natural GDP, it means like 7,000 per year, like annually, like 7 million per year. And then your level of consumption may be only that level, because that's the thing that you can afford. But then when you're having much more income, then it means you can afford more. So it means your consumption to that energy is also quite high one. So that's kind of like increasing, is not like a linear. If you can see it look like linear, but there is a non-linear according to them. But I will say this is kind of like to show one of the indicating that there is strong relationship with the level of economic and then the use of natural resources, or in this case is energy. Okay, again, this is kind of like to give you an evidence what Professor Budy is saying about in order to kind of like looking at the natural resources management, you may also need to be understood about how to use quantitative analysis, because in economic, yes, they may use kind of like a big data, and then you need to kind of like having modeling in terms of predicting or kind of like giving an idea what's relationship between natural resources and something economically. Okay, now I start with the sustainable development concept. It's like echoing somewhere. Okay, so if you read all the documentation about sustainable development, they always referring back to the, as I mentioned, about the Brundtland report. That's basically the name of the chairwoman commission during that period, back on the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development, or WCED. The report so-called Our Common Future. So the word of sustainable development was the first time officially being used, according to recorded. Okay, so but actually about the relationship between natural resources and other type thing has been in I mean academically has been there. One of example, like I'm coming from demographic point of view, is like population. You look at the Malthusian population theory. We may learn that during high school, during SMP or SMA, that the what do you call it, the population grows geometrically, while agriculture output grows arithmetically. So basically there is kind of like yes, both of them kind of like link each other, but one is kind of like faster and not the other one. So if you look at that, the concept of sustainable development, that is basically formally saying that we need to do something with this kind of like the limited sources with other thing that is may not limited one. Okay, so once again, the concept is there, just a matter of not people using the correct terminology one. Any other things after Robert Malthus? Yes, there are some like from United Nations. So basically United Nations is one of the most driven about the using of the concept of concern about the environment and then the development. So then the sustainable development come into the word when they talk about the Our Common Future report, which is kind of like Brundtland report was published. So that's kind of like the report with the fundamental principle of the concept of sustainable development, like what I mentioned in the first place. So they define about the need or the needs of the current one without sacrificing for the future one. Okay, so once more time, the concept is not the new one that has been discussed in the past. The only kind of like wording about sustainable development wasn't being used. So only during that the wording, I mean the report, that's back and like officially been used one. Okay, so what else is about concerning about sustainability? There are many actually, not only in terms of population, but also in terms of social norm, in terms of the culture, in terms of economic, in terms of energy, in terms of world order. They're always talking about sustainability. It means we want to kind of like continuously sufficient enough to have these sources, right? Population decline in the growth and stabilize in the size. They're talking about sustainability, about the consumption, and then social norm compatible with natural, technical, and flexible centralization, about the culture, individualism compared with the, what do you call it, socialism. So they are also kind of like whether, do you think everyone goes to the individualistic one, or kind of like they keep each other exactly, say, for example, Indonesia and many Asian countries going to be exactly as kind of like more collectivism rather than individualism. Or this is more kind of like blending between collectivism together and then individualistic one. So we don't know yet, right? So that's kind of like more about the issues, again, sustainability. Go back to the early Brundtland report about the World Commission of Environment Development. So what actually they've been reported? So the report say basically criticize about the trend of the global environmental problem. People talking about the climate change started, talking about the temperature who's kind of like changed in some places. The main point they're talking about is about the critical environmental and development issues need to be kind of like formulated, to become like to look at the link. And then there are to propose new form of about the international cooperation, because they do realize that what happened in one place may also affect to another place, or the other way around. What happened to the neighbor countries may also affect to the next and the neighbor countries as well. So it means you can't just rely on yourself when you taking care about the environment and so on. So last point that there is basically to raise the level of understanding and commitment. Not only individual, but also the organization like NGO and the government, and also the whole the government itself. So it's basically it's about community engagement. So it is the case about not only about one place to the others, one family or one individual, but it is kind of like everyone business. So we need to kind of like having commitment, everyone in the same page one. Okay, so that's why the word of sustainable development has been used. Is basically it is a development because it is about, it aims to improve the well-being and quality life for all. And then the condition is basically it has condition for sustainability. So it implies to protect the existing resources which may be required by the future generation to maintain a standard of living at least as good as our current one. If you are talking about, for example, footprint, there are some studies already saying that if the Earth equally distributed to everyone, we may need at least 1.5 Earth in order for everyone living exactly in the same standard. Or even in other studies saying like we may need more than like almost 2 Earths in order to everyone to have exactly the same kind of like footprint, right? Okay, because at this moment some places may be kind of like consume a lot, in other places maybe consume less. Some places basically distribute more, and then the other places distribute less. So if it is, you want to make kind of like everyone sustain in the same equal everywhere, so we need more than one earth. We need more than one bumi. So we need like two bumi. Just like if you live in the city, you can like, oh, the place is so cramped, we need to get more places. But on the other hand, in other places, like in the new capital city, like in East Kalimantan, for example, there's still kind of like vast area that no one live yet, except for kind of like the planning for the new capital one. So it's kind of like one very sparse, one is kind of like already crowded, the other way around. Okay, so that's kind of like the condition we need to have sustainability. Okay, in short, the concept of this sustainable development is basically three things I want to say. First, it is multidimensional aspect. That's what we are going to consider. Yeah. So what the aspect dimension is three things: economic, social, political, and ecological. Okay. So this is basically sometimes like people just put social, but other people's kind of like putting together socio-political, but it has to be kind of like economic and ecological part that they've been mentioned. The other one is it linkage between generation, because what we are doing here now is basically to guarantee our next future generation will have kind of like sustained life, or the same kind of like at least the quality living exactly equal or much better than that one. Okay, impact on the next generation, transmission between generation, and intra and intergeneration equity as well. Last characteristic from the sustainable development discussed in that report is basically focus on human being or people capacity. So like the engagement about the stakeholders, inclusion for everybody within the society, and then the importance of the capacity. It means everyone should kind of like doing their roles. People who can chip in small thing, they have to do small thing. If people in the big thing, they have to do in the big thing as well. So the importance of the capacity, everyone play their role accordingly in order to kind of like to make it happen. Okay, there are questions about what dimension that who's asking that. Just at the same time answer, yeah, Mas Zeqi. There was question about how long the time frame. What are the factor? Oh, quite long. Okay, anyway, what are the elements that support the goal sustainability development? Okay, yes, January. I can say that January. I can say that if you talk about what dimension, there are plenty of that one. But if we, because I'm going to show you that there are different approach. One approach is basically looking at 3 dimensions in sustainable development. Remember when we talk about the resources, most of the studies talking resources mean natural resources, human resources, and capital or financial, right? So the same thing here. So the dimension of sustainable development is society, which is basically is about the social, human being as well. And then the economy, which is basically the capital itself, and then the natural resources, which is basically environment. Okay, so this kind of like 3 dimensions of sustainable development need to be strengthened. Okay, economy mean economic sustainability means maximizing society well-being, equity, eradicating poverty, as well as equal access in terms of resources, and efficient in terms of the use of natural resources. Society means the people itself, usually talking about socio-political sustainability, social equity, and then the quality of life, having equal or good access to the health, education, a job, as well as kind of like having diversity, harmony in terms of pluralism, and then participation. At the same time, we need to have to maintain of the environment, right? Sustainable environment mean we conserve about the environments, and then also we knew that what we are using now is basically need to be efficient and need to be sustained even until in the future one. So it means using the clean water to make sure that what we have now, clean water, is also exactly going to happen in the future. So it's not like kind of like using too much of the energy or like oil and so on, and then eventually we don't have anything yet. So we need to start thinking about in the future one as well. So that's kind of like one approach. The other approach that if you look at the other studies is about using the 5 dimension. Talking about the place, talking about the person, talking about the permanence or people who's looking at the actors, okay? Intergenerational justice, in identity, and so on. So there are several dimensions that if you're talking about what are dimensions that in order to taking care of sustainability, okay? This is from the Segejo studies, talking about the new 5-dimensional sustainability triangle when you talk about the place, person, and then permanence one. So what I'm going to discuss more is basically the 3-dimension as the sources itself, okay? Socio-economic, and then environmental. Social, economic, and then environmental. So when we talk about social, mostly talking about human resources because they are kind of like human social creature one. Economics more talking about the capital as well as the financial cost saving, spending, cost of living, and so on. And then environment is basically more kind of like natural resources here. Okay, so those kind of like what goes in the society and economy is subject to the natural environment which supply the input and absorb the waste. So it's basically they are kind of like they link each other, which is like if everything in the very idealistic one, it's just basically it's become sustainable. That's the idea of having 3 dimensions of sustainability, social, economic, and environment. So look at what happened in the natural environment going to effect of social and economic, but at the same time when whatever happening into the economy is also subject to the cycle or to the society as well as to the environment, right? Like what the graphic that I saw you about the increase of the income, for example, they may also kind of like have higher level of the consumption of energy and so on. So it's kind of like what each other kind of like giving impact each other and also kind of like a cycle to the rest of the one. Okay. Okay. So one by one, economic sustainability is basically imply a system of production that satisfies present consumption level without compromising future needs. That's what they aim for economic sustainability. Yes, we consume today, but then mind you that we also need to think about what happened in the future one, okay? So that's kind of like need some innovation, some creativity in the agriculture, for example, not only using the natural one, but also the invention of, for example, using the genomic artificial. We're talking about whether this is kind of like healthy or not healthy enough if we use kind of like the new invention in terms of agriculture, okay? Because we heard already in the past from Thomas Herbert Malthus that population growing kind of like very fast one, but not the natural one. Okay, so then thinking about what's going to happen, diversification or intensification, that's much kind of like for everyone. Okay, so it has changed from traditional perception to be more kind of like how to be more creative, into more thinking about more sustainable consideration. So it means support community sustainable initiative, not only for individual, because we're not talking only one or two groups, but also connect everyone, and then support the development of sustainable business practice and enterprise. How to do development sustainable practice. I just give you one example, the study from INC here, talking about the strategy about how to do, still doing the business and economic, but also at the same time taking care of the environmental performance outcome at the same time. Yeah. So you have the external drivers, but also internal driver. The external is basically based on the consumer level demand, and then the internal is basically how do you manage in terms of innovation, right? And then you may thinking about the ethic, you're thinking about the how to do policy, how to design of the product, and then how to kind of like make it marketing much more kind of like distribute equally. Okay, so then you're talking about in terms of business outcome. In order to get profit, of course, you're thinking about cost reduction, innovation, but also consumer acceptance. Because what's the point if you produce something new, innovative way, but then it's going to harm to everyone? Okay, maybe this is too much chemical. It is kind of like, yes, you make kind of like a business profit oriented one, but it means you can like going to reduce or to waste, to give waste to the environment. Right, so that's kind of like not really business strategy to the environmental sustainability. Social sustainability. This is again, as I said, when we talk about social, means focus more to the people, to the population itself, because the people is kind of like the not only the subject but also the object. They are the one who's doing it as an actor, but they also people kind of like people, they are the one who is going to receive the result of development itself. Okay, so that's kind of like whatever you do is going to give impact as well to yourself. Okay, so the one of the way that to have social sustainability is basically to reduce the poverty. It means to make everyone living easily, living according to the standard of living what they aim to. Okay, so the objective to reduce poverty is basically either income and consumption, access to facilities like education, to the health, to the service, and also they have the capacity and skill and capability to execute that one, right? What's the point if you can like having high income, but then there is no capacity to do it? So it's mean you only rely on something, right? So it has to become like development all the time, so like knowledge, skill, access to health, and so on and so on. So that's a lot of the issues, but also a lot of potential one. In order to ensure social sustainability is basically to improve of people capability of well-being, and against of distribution, not only in one place to the other, but you know what the problem is kind of like why there is a big gap between within the country, for example. That's because of distributions. Usually people in the social countries, for example, they would like to share everything one. But at the same time, when we go to the United States, for example, where the capitalism is more kind of like concentration only to the people who's kind of like concentrate in that capital one, right? So equity transition, that's kind of like the if there are still kind of like the gap between those who have and then those who haven't, this is kind of like basically social sustainability not going to happen. So it's going to happen social sustainability when everyone kind of like receiving equally according proportionally to what they need one. Okay, so if you're learning in the economic, you may have about so-called poverty trap. So people usually in the level of poverty is always goes to the cycle again and again after generation because of there is not living that one. So the education may be kind of like one of the way to goes from the poverty trap, but not only about the poverty trap, but also the issues about like inequality and also vulnerability. So a lot of kind of like issues if we cannot just discuss in this one. My point here basically is, yes, when we talk about natural resources management, we also have to consider what happened in terms of social sustainability. It's not going to happen in terms of natural sustainability if you haven't seen that social sustainability happen or at least close to equal. Okay. A lot of things, including in terms of socio-political sustainability, political leadership, political commitment, political longevity, and a lot of things. How I'm working with time? Okay, there's still some sort actually. So the third point about the dimension of environmental. Okay, so we talk about the economic, we talk about the social one. So the third point that is also very important is environmental sustainability, which is, this is kind of like support for those things. So yes, natural not going to be live alone without economic and social. The same thing, economic and social cannot survive or cannot be sustained unless the environmental sustainability is also happening. Okay, so this is kind of like the supporting element in terms of to make that happen in for the other sustainability. So it requires natural capital be sustainable use as a sources of economic input and as a sink for waste for the social one. It implies that natural resources must be harvested faster than they can be regenerated, while waste must be emitted faster than they can be assimilated by the environment. As I said, this is a function of time. It's also a function of space. So we need to think about how fast and what is the time dimension we're talking about when we talking about the environment, especially in non-renewable resources. Okay, it has to be kind of like combination, not only about the local perspective, but also global perspective. Remember about climate change. This is not only local one, it's about global one, right? What happened in Sahara may also kind of like give impact to our one. Just give you an example between Australia and Indonesia, for example. If Australia has very low like a temperature because of the winter, the wind can goes to Indonesia, right? In particular, the southern part Indonesia, East Timor, in Lombok, in Bali, they feel kind of like very cold as well, the weather. The same things when if it is kind of like very hot in Indonesia, but also kind of like the wind give kind of like back to into Australia. So that's kind of like perspective we thinking about not only local, but also kind of like at least as what they call it, the country neighborhood as well. Okay, so the strategy needs to address the interrelated challenge of building healthy societies, economic and environments, to make it like living longer as well as in the environmental sustainability. So that's kind of like the concern about the environment one. I just want to give you an idea that against the concern about the what do you call it, the environment is also has been discussed from the past, not only starting when the World Congress in terms of environments, but also after that a lot of discussion talking about the sustainable development and then looking at the ecological issues, ecological sustainability issues. Back in 2004, for example, talking about sustainable development is powerful global contradiction to the contemporary Western culture and lifestyle. 2015, talking about sustainable development is a development that protects the environment because the sustainable environment enables sustainable development. Okay, so a lot of studies and also discussion concern about the ecological equally the concern with economics as well as the social one. It depends on if you're looking at from the natural resource management, most of the time is talking about the environment. Okay. Zeqi, how many more minutes I do have?
You have 13 minutes left.
Okay, okay, good.
Yeah.
So in short about the environmental, so we can have a look from different type of the environmental implication, right? So for example, when we talk about the energy, when we talk about the mineral, when we talk about water, as well as the impact to animal and population, there are different type of the impact, which is basically once more time, you will look at the studies looking at, yes, they're talking about natural or the environmental impact, but it's also something to do with the use of economics and then the social one. Okay, because that's kind of like the pathway, that's the relationship between one to the others. That's kind of like the dimension that we have. I'm not so sure whether everyone following how the sustainable development has been established. I just want to give you briefly how the sustainable development has been established. So yes, sustainable development word was initially in the Brundtland report back in 1987. But then after that, at the global level, we're talking about global level, 1992, there was the first Rio Summits is about the sustainable development should become priority item for international community. So that's the first, the Earth Summit in Rio. And then in 2000, there was discussion about it's supposed to be putting as the global agenda. Then remember when the year 2000 coming, a lot of people said millennium, and so on. So that's the wording of, rather than putting sustainable development goals, they just put kind of like millennium development goals, which is actually talking about sustainable development. So just because of they use the wording of millennium. Okay, so 1992 was the first Earth Rio Summit, and then 2002, which is 10 years after, they do it for World Summit to talk about what happened after 10 years when we declare about sustainable development become priority. So the evaluation is basically been put into agenda for Millennium Development Goals, and then 10 years after 2012, they did evaluate about what have been the result from the commitment in Rio Summit, and then Millennium Development Goal, and then 10 years after the implementation. And you know what? There are several from some goals, about 8 goals, some kind of like achievable in some places, but others places may not achievable. Okay, so including in Indonesia, it was way kind of like a very not really achievable, the Millennium Development Goal back in the beginning one. So the 8th one is not kind of like very much talking about sustainable in general. This is mostly talking about the health and then the gender equality and about the poverty and hunger. It's very kind of like a very wide group one. After the evaluation, they start thinking about that. Well, because this declaration is decided by the people representative at the UN level. So they're only thinking about those people thinking this is the one is more priority one. So after some kind of like evaluation, they're thinking about this is not supposed to do that one. It's more kind of like, this is more kind of like top-down approach. It's supposed to be more bottom-up approach. So what happened is the result shows that mostly is the target is not really met properly. Only in some indicators target met, but not like in the infant mortality rate is not really target met. In terms of maternal mortality rate is also not target met one. Okay, so the evaluation shows not only at the global level, but also in regional level. So a lot of kind of like the target didn't met during that period. So what happened is after that one is they create from Millennium Development Goal in 2015. They said it is the time to kind of like consider about the way that they did. So rather than having top-down approach, they would like to do it bottom-up approach. What happened was basically they collect all they collect data or survey from representative around the world, not only those who were sitting at the UN level, but also at the NGO, at the government level, at the community level. They can fill the survey online and then they collect it. So the question was about, what do you think are the most priority issues that need to be considered by the world one? Okay, so it's quite huge opinion until they kind of like, if you look to thinking like the qualitative survey, this is kind of like more than 1,000 opinion, right? So the question was that, how are you going to categorize that one? So just like qualitative, they make categorization. So initially there's like 11 segments: inequality, health, education, growth, employment, environmental sustainability, governance, conflict, fragility, population dynamic, hunger, food, nutrition, security, energy, and water. So those kind of like the thing that's the big issue. We can like what they call it as thematic issues, right? Eventually, what happened was, this is what the former United Nations at the time, General Ban Ki-moon, saying that member states are now fully engaged in discussion to define sustainable development goals, because they've been open to say their own words and then to say what actually the priority. And then our effort to achieve the MDG are a critical building block toward establishing a stable foundation. So MDG is kind of like saying like, that's kind of like the trial or the pilot project to make this one. So this is the one that they have. So the idea of HDG to kind of like having the bottom-up approach, getting the opinion from the people on the field rather than only at the UN Secretariat level. So the triple bottom-up line approach, which is, we call it kind of like the big three thematic, and basically economic, environmental sustainability, and social inclusion. So this is basically why this is kind of like the three dimension that can like having to support of the sustainable development. Okay, economic, environmental, and then social inclusion. Once again, this is kind of like the last creation of the all the more than 1,000 opinion, and then putting into the thematic one. So every goals has kind of like sub goals. Okay, no poverty level has different goals. Gender equality has different sub goal as well, including with the life below waters and life on land has kind of like other several levels as well. So if you categorize from the 17th, what are those in terms of economic, social, and environment? So for example, in terms of environment, the goals number 13 and 15 and 14, 6, 7, and 12, that's basically part of the environmental resources. When we talk about economics from the life point of view or economic and technological development, they have like goal number 1, goal number 2, goal number 3, and then goal number 8 and goal number 9. So that's kind of like the classification goes to the economic point of view. Why it is important is basically it is important to categorize this one, because then when there is an evaluation, it's easy for us saying like, oh, looks like your economic goals is kind of like not really doing well, or your social dimension is not doing very well one. So that's what's happening today. How do they evaluate that? Okay. Okay. Just a few more minutes, you can talk later on. Another one, as I said, three-dimension is one way to have a look. Another study also proposed is basically looking at not dimension of that social, economic, and environment, but looking at where is the focus more. This is more kind of like the people as itself, or it is more kind of like prosperity, peace, partnership, and the planet as a whole. Okay, so that's kind of like another dimension. If you want to evaluate, depends on what dimension do you want to see. Do you want to see about the partnership? It's mean like the process. Is it kind of like only one by one, like a country by country, or this is kind of like the partnership is doing very well? Okay, so that's also, people can do that one. Either way, whether you are using the 3-dimension or you're using the 5-dimension, like a 5P1, it's kind of like give you an easy way to evaluate about the achievement to that one. Okay, for example, this is the report talking about achievement of DG in OECD countries one. They're looking at the goal of poverty. Which countries is the best one? And then they can combine about goal by goal, but also you can combine based on dimension that we talk about, social, talking about the environmental, and then we're talking about the political. Okay, I think that's the end of my presentation as moderator. So I give you back to you. Okay, looks like already Zuhur. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Salut. Can you still hear my voice, or we can just wait?
Yeah.
Is it quite clear? Because yeah, the most it is like next to the building in which I stay.
No worries.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Shall I answer now, or shall I wait for
yeah.
the answer?
Yeah, it has been finished here. Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Saul, for the insightful materials. So I like to let the audience, and I've already found that there are a lot of
there are some questions I found here.
some question. Maybe I like to read the first question from Mrs. Januaria Kartika Ati from Universitas Nusa Cendana. What are the elements that support the goal of sustainable development? And the second question is from Mrs. Laurenciana Murinboro from Universitas Nusa Cendana. What are the efforts made by humans in managing natural resources properly and correctly? Maybe the second question is related about it's like the technology development that has been, devoted importantly in the presence of energy efficiency. So is there any international institutions concerned about how we can create the technology to generate efficiently for the energy consumption?
Yeah, thank you. From Nusa Cendana, okay, this is from the NTT, yeah. Okay, thank you very much for the question, Pak Mas or Januari Kartika, and then and Marianus Alexandro. Maybe the first one I would say like the impact of economic activities that do not pay attention to the environment and how to overcome this, but also what are the elements of the support goal of sustainable development. Okay. Internationally speaking, if you have heard about so-called the tax or pajak of the carbon has been discussed widely. Okay, so what does it mean is the tax for carbon is basically it is basically one of the effort to make people aware that whatever your action has implication to the environment. Okay, so it means like airplane. These days, you need to pay carbon tax. Actually, that has been included in your airfare. Yeah. Internationally speaking, also when you produce some like clothes or shoes, there is also kind of like people talking about the tax. The tax, we call it as the carbon tax, is basically, for example, every $100 that you produce, you need to tax $1 for the environment, or like some percentage of that one. So what happened is basically this company who's taking care of your carbon tax, they have obligation to at least say, for example, maybe to grow one more trees. So it means every carbon that you produce, it may kill several carbon, what do you call it, carbon dioxide, right? It's produced carbon dioxide. In order, one of the function of the tree growth is basically to absorb that carbon monoxide one. So it means the company has to kind of like grow one plant. Okay, for example, in mountain somewhere, they say like, from the tax that you paid, we already grow 1,000 more trees. That's basically, it's become more and more a common practice. In Australia, for example, is we already started that one. The place maybe not in Australia, but we say like we plan this in Brazil. So we plan somewhere. So kind of like how much money that you spend for production using the technology, and then use kind of like producing of carbon monoxide, then you need to be deduct to pay for that one. So that's one of the way to do it. And then I'm not so sure whether Indonesia has ratified that convention, but that's what the convention talking about, the climate change convention. If you look at the news or television, there are a lot of protests about carbon climate change as well. So that's one of the way. The second one is basically just like the using of, what do you call it, child labor in terms of the International Labor Agency organization. So there is already starting that you need to comply with using the clean energy. It means maybe not like mixing solar and other things. You need to become like the level of what do you call it, timbal, the PB level has to be certain level. So it means if there are a surveyor coming to your company and then your company didn't comply with the regulation, that could be some fine to your company, either going to be closed down, or there is a very severe consequences. That also has been started. I'm not so sure whether Indonesia has ratified that convention as well, but this is kind of like the same thing, like analogy when talking about child labor. Remember when a lot of company like Zara, H&M, they've been get fined because of they use child labor in Bangladesh or India, and then so they got fined and they get banned for the production over there again. So that's kind of like starting as well about the using technology and to think about environment.
Okay, so actually the government can intervene like the energy or the resources utilizations, right? By like doing the refinement or punishment for the company that is not satisfied the rules from the government. All right, for the next question from Mrs. Katarina from Universitas Nusa Cendana. How long is the time frame set for achieving the sustainable development goals?
Okay.
And maybe for the next one, yes, from Mrs. Margareta Susanti. How is the sustainable development in what kind of economic aspect is most optimally applied in developing countries? Maybe it's like which point that is related to the developing countries.
Okay. For Ibu Katarina, how long? So the goal setting up for 2035, because they start in 2015, remember? When Millennium Development Goals 2000, they have 15 years. So the Sustainable Development is setting up until another 2030, actually not 35. So they have setting up for another 15 years. So everything is set up for 2030, and then hopefully by that time, all the goal, what they set up is achieved. For example, in terms of maternal mortality rate, right? They ask to kind of like reduce at least about 50% from what you level now. Say, for example, Indonesia still kind of like above 200. So by the time 2030, the target supposed to be kind of like achieve Indonesia at least to meet standard by less than 100 per, let's say, for example, if there are 100 women going to give birth, so if it is kind of like 50%, sorry, so at this moment is above 200. It means every 1,000, there are 200 women going to die because of giving birth, maternal mortality. So by 2030, so the expectation is that Indonesia should reduce by 50%. It means if there are 1,000 women going to give birth, maybe only 100 or less women going to die because of maternal mortality. Okay, so that's the expectation. They didn't make it like this is for more developed or this is more less developed. They make it general because everyone at this moment is different level. Like Australia is already kind of like 8 per 1,000. It means every 1,000 women give birth, only 8 or 6 people, women going to die because of the maternal mortality, right? Okay, so if they want to reduce, it means only 3 or 4 is basically the level to that one. Okay, so it's not kind of like, oh, this is for developing and this is for more less development. Okay, but of course they have to do kind of like at the pace of what level you are. It's not kind of like if you are kindergarten now, next year you expect until university is impossible, right? So it depends on what your level now, but at least the progress. So again, the word is about the progress is much better off. It's not kind of like again, development, it means the state. You have kind of like different state from now to the next one. It's kind of like achieving progress in a good way, not in that way.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Right, for the next question from Mrs. Maria from Undana Kupang. What are the challenges faced in implementing the concept of sustainable development? And the next one is from Mr. Bagus Narendra from Bappenas. What is the follow-up that we can do for sustainable development goals can reach in district, because there are some district in Indonesia doesn't imply the SDGs.
Thank you, Bu Maria from China. What are the challenges? Varies from one to the others. Yeah, remember like when my slide, the last one, talking about Australia achievement. So that's going to be different pictures if we compare with Indonesia. If you familiar with sustainable development, goes to Sustainable Development Goals report, the latest one, 2021. They give you some ideas. Just give you an idea, like the goal number 1, for example, one particular country is achieving very much, others maybe kind of like they not achieve that one very well, yeah, because they're working in terms of poverty and hunger and so on. So it means one country to the other have different challenges and different problem or issues. But mind you, if we put in general, most of the time it's about the commitment from the government, and then the society is one of the always coming again and again been mentioned why some goal has been achieved and then some other not achieved. The second one is talking about the financially, okay, because like it or not, to any effort need to become like some resources. In this one is financial resources, so it is impossible to do that one without having support financially and also infrastructurally. Okay, so the commitment is basically one, and then the second one is about financially or economically the problem that they have. Of course, like in Cendana, logistic is also one of the issues. In the last 5 years, I've been kind of like involved in some research in Kupang, in Flores, as well as in Sumba. The problems like in terms of health, for example, is inequality of accessing health. Because imagine like if you living in the mountainous area and then the puskesmas or the hospital in the close to the coastal area in the so you have to kind of cross not only river but also across the ocean in order to kind of like bringing a mother who is going to give birth to do that one. So that's kind of like transportation, the infrastructure, and so on. That's the only thing I can say. Mas Bagus Narendra for talking about what is the follow-up that we can do for sustainable development goals can be reached in district. One thing that has been mentioned is basically about the commitment from one level to the others. So yes, at the district level, the hard thing that always mentioned is about the data evidence, the evidence of the data. It is right that some district is very advanced in terms of reporting. Some other district didn't do advanced in terms of reporting, because everything, how do we assess whether they can like reaching the goal or not is based on some indicators, like how many people living in poverty level, how many people can like working or employed or not employed, right? The more accurate data you have from that district level, the more kind of like you can say that this district achieve or not achieving. So the hardest part in Indonesian context, for example, we often don't have the data or evidence at the district level rather than at the provincial, at the national level one, but not at this district level. So I think the first one is basically to give more improvement in terms of data reportings, but at the same time, it's also kind of like improving about the quality of the service that related with the sustainable development. That's what I can say at this moment.
Okay, maybe it relates to the my personal question about the business versus household issue about the energy utilization, Dr. Salut. Because when we talk about a business, maybe the government can impose the rule for using the efficient energy. If they don't fulfill the rule, of course, the government can impose the fine to the business. But when you talk about household, it will be much more difficult to impose the rules. The rules or impose the penalty for the household. So how the international institution deal with it?
Good question. And then honestly, I'm not really aware about any studies talking about the household level. You're right. I mean, like just left alone about the imposing the policy of using the better or the good quality of energy use one. Say, for example, during COVID-19, we asked everyone wearing masks, right? So the policy can say like, you have to wear a mask, but in reality, you cannot say like every time the police will say, like in India, remember like in the picture, say like they have to kind of like slap everyone to go to the lawn. So I don't know. I mean, like, yes, that's the hardest thing, how to make sure that everyone doing what been expected or comply with the rule one. For the business, yes, you have consequences. Like if you didn't comply with this one, your business is going to be closed, right? But for individual, household level, is basically from the attitude and then the awareness about how important. Like I remember, like in the first place when we heard about not having masks going to affect your health, everyone wearing that one. But these days when said like, okay, looks like the pandemic is gone, so you don't have to wear that one. Everyone kind of like starting to get, yes, we don't want to that one. Okay, yeah, I think it did practice for at the household level, but also in terms of leadership, I think need to become like an example from the leaders itself, saying if the leaders doing it, so I don't think that the people are going to say like, oh, I have the really role model that doing exactly what they have, is not practicing what they preach, something like that. I don't know yet the answer.
Okay, thank you. So because there are still several questions, so I like just select like the last 4 questions. Maybe from Mrs. Jaya Ayunisi from Kali. Jaya Ayunisi Kali Uli. The question is, why are the SDGs so broad compared to very specific MDGs? And then the next question is from Mrs. Yovita. What are the SDGs that must be done so that the success is achieved in a country or region? Maybe it's like when we talk about SDGs, is there any like the most priority from out of 9 out of point that consists in the SDGs? Maybe that question.
Yeah. Thank you. I think Bujaya Ayuningsi and Bu Yovita. Thanks for the question. Yes, as I mentioned about the process of how the UN come up with the 17 goals. That's actually, I would say it's a much better approach compared with the Millennium Development Goal. So Millennium Development Goal been established by representative only. Say like if at DPR level, those DPR members who decide which one. But for the SDGs is not representative at the UN Secretariat, but the survey was open to everyone around the world, but they targeted to the governments, to the NGO, to the business sector, to everyone. I'm not so sure whether everyone get that one, but at least the more component is not only at the UN representative level. Okay. Even so, you're right. How do we decide which one is more priority, right? Because say, for example, Indonesia propose health #1 priority. US maybe propose about the use of increasing of labor force. Yeah? So we can like competing each other from Asian perspective with American perspective. So that's why they didn't say which one is the first priority or not, but they will say that for the well-being, everyone is kind of like equally equally important. Doesn't mean that that's why I mean like for some country they've been already very extraordinary in terms of health access. Like in Australia, for example, we do have, just like BPJS, we do have like Medicare. So everyone should have equally treated at the hospital. But when you have private insurance, then you can choose you want to which level. You want to have PIV treatment, you want to have more kind of like single room, single person in single room, and so on. But at the very basic level, everyone equal. You have like 4 person in one room if it is kind of like the hospital. You have to be treated equally, even in emergency. They didn't ask you, do you have insurance or not? First, safe about if you are in accident and so on, and then later on they will ask, what insurance do you have? Is it government or is it kind of like private one? So not asking first insurance and then later on. So my point here is basically it is true, it's hard to say which one is more priority or not, depends on the country you are in, right? Depend on the region where you are in. But that's why they make it equally, the whole 17 goals equal. And then to Bu Ayu asking about why SDG so broad compared to the very specific MDG one. Again, as I said, because of different approach they have. MDG is only decided by representative, and then SDG is decided based on the bottom-up approach. So that's why I will say 17 is really kind of like very broad for Ibu Ayu, but everyone maybe say like, can we have like 28 or 68? They have to come up with number. Thank you, Mas Zeqi.
Okay, thank you. Maybe the last two questions from Mr. Marcelino. What techniques are used to make efficient use of limited environmental resources in sustainable development? Maybe it related to the like method or approach or technology, whatever, about to produce efficient use of energy. And the second one is from Mr. Karni. Why do development and environmental sustainability often conflict? That's really a difficult question, I think. Yeah.
The first one is what about
is from Mr. Marcelino. What techniques are used to make efficient use of limited environmental resources in sustainable
okay. For one country has different approach. Indonesia still has kind of like more intensification rather than diversification for the environment one in terms of resources. Okay, so the point here is basically since we do have advance in technology, either you're doing intensification or diversification, it's supposed to be kind of like more aimed to the well-being of people. For example, like with Dr. Johnny, we talk about the use of the new variant for what do you call it, the corn, as well as the maybe some other rice. The question is that, is it safe for everyone or not, right? I remember in Indonesia, some places they have like even small land, but the result, it could be like 10 times of the big size one. So it's more like intensification. So the technology actually play a big role in that one, innovation as well as in the, okay. If you ask about what technique is more efficient, it depends on what the aims as well as what the consequences they have, right? Efficient, it means costly less. Efficient mean time consuming is less. So it's kind of like usually about 4 months. Now you can sort it into 2 months. That's also kind of like efficient. But then if we combine with the consequences, say like, yes, the time is getting less, only 2 months, and then the cost per kilogram, for example, is getting less, yes, it's efficient. But then the consequences is basically to make people become heart disease, a lot of some other disease, then I would say that's not efficient at all. That's more even kind of like very efficient in economic, but not efficient in other one. Okay, so I would say efficient has to become like consider not only economically, but also the impact to the natural, but also the society. That's what I would say efficient. And then the second question, Zeqi.
So the second question is, why do development and environmental sustainability often conflict? Maybe it's like how to keep the balance between the development and environmental sustainability.
How to keep balance? Honestly, I don't know how to keep it balanced, because in this world, we do have people in at least two general view. Like economists, they are very basic, very focused on like an efficient, talking about efficient before. They are kind of like more egocentric and the environment centric, right? That's kind of like worldview that we're talking about. Even at the global level, we have the environmentalists talking about we have to kind of like priority of the environment. But the economists, they said, doesn't matter about the environment as long as we got more costly less and then more efficient in terms of timing and so on, that's kind of like already enough. Okay, how to make it balance? Then we need to kind of like to talk each other. Those who are in egocentrics, people who just thinking about the more economic point of view, but then also people who's thinking about the environment. Yes, environment is a good one, but also need to consider about economic point of view, but also the other human resource. So the communication between those two worldview people groups need to be kind of like established and then regularly conducted. So then we can be in the balance. As long as there are always two things, two left side or two right side, there's not going to be balance. So you need to be kind of like communication and the negotiation between those two. That's what I think.
Okay, thank you for the answer, Dr. Salut. So we have run out of time. Now I'd like to conclude the discussion today. And the first point that I take from the Dr. Salut is that it's like we not only manage the natural resources, but also the balance between natural resources and also the non-natural resources such as human resources and the capital resources. And when we talk about development, we talk about not only the state, but also the process. So it is really essential to address that sustainable development ensure the balance between the economic growth and also the environment, as you just mentioned before. And when we talk about sustainability, we also do not talk about the population only, but also other important aspects such as economic sustainability, social and environmental, energy, and so on and so forth. So it's really essential to address the entirety of the issue. And the last one is the natural resources management is associated to the SDGs entirely. So it is essential to address every issue of it. So it's not only prioritize any kind of issue, but we need to entirely take into of the issue. All right, I think that's all. Thank you for Dr. Salut for attending this international guest lecture today. So I hope you stay healthy in this situation. Yeah, thank you. So for the next one, I would like to give back to the MC.
Well, I would like to thank Mr. Zeqi for guiding this course and discussion today. Now we will symbolically hand over the certificate to moderator and speaker, which will be given by the Head of Economic of Development Program, Dr. Herman Cahyodarto, SAMP.
Thank you, Pamasa, as Master Ceremony. I am pleased to have our speaker today who really have a great competency related to our main topic today, about sustainable natural resources. Special Dr. Salut Muhidin, M.Sc, as a lecturer and researcher from Makerere University. And so, thank you for allocating your time to join and share to knowledge with us today.
Thank you, Pak Herman. Sama-sama.
Thank you once again, and I hope we can collaborate again in another chain.
Inshallah.
Thank you again. Yeah. And also give a certificate to moderator, Mr. Mohammad Zeqi Yasin. Thank you very much your attention as a moderator this moment and international virtual course today. Thank you, Mr. Muhammad Zeqi Yasin. And also I give to time in to Aulia Pamasa as a master ceremony. Thank you.
Terima kasih Pak Herman.
Terima kasih, Prof. Salut.
Okay, now we are entering the documentation session. To all the participants at Zoom, please activate the camera feature and give your best facial expression. To those in charge of the session, I invite you. Start with slide number 1, 1, 2, 3. Slide number 2, 1, 2, 3. Slide number 3, 1, 2, 3. Slide number 4, 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much for your willingness. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't feel like we are at the end of the event. Thank you very much to our speakers today who were very extraordinary. And thank you also to the participant of the International Virtual Course, Sustainable Natural Resource, for taking the time to attend and explore together about this wonderful theme. And don't forget to fill in the second presence link that has been provided by the committee. And considering that the presence of college is requirement to get an ESAT feature. And finally, I am Aulia Pamasa Setiyantono as the Master of Ceremony. From the deepest of my heart, I do apologize if there are words that are not listened for your attention. And goodbye to all the participants and see you in the next event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Mbak Aulia. Thank you, Mas Zeqi. Thank you, everyone. Leaving.
Terima kasih Pak Prof Muhid.
Yuk, Pak Herman. See you next one, Pak di Jember.
Thank you, Mr. Solid.
Thanks.
Terima kasih, Nicholas.
Halo. Apa kabar?
Baik, Nicholas.
Ya.
Apaan ke
Jember? Ya.
Thank you.